for this. So it's part 2. I'm very quickly going to just build my interface, and we'll go through how to do this. How do we write our own method? So I'll just quickly drag on the things I need, a couple labels. I guess 3 labels to be exact. So I want my boxes to be named descriptively. So I'll call the second one txt year. Call the first one txt name. This is what I mean if you got comments in your assignment thing, you should name your inputs descriptively rather than having them called text box 1 and text box 2, which doesn't tell us what's in there. I'm going to give them descriptive names. We'll say name. We'll say year. My button. I'll change the name of my button to BTN at age. And this label will be my message. I'll give it a descriptive name. So I can run my form, and that's how it's going to look. Clicking my button doesn't do anything yet. We now want to write. So we're going to do 3 things here. So we're going to get the 2 inputs and store in variables. So I need 2 variables. What should I call the variables that are descriptive rather than calling them variable 1 and variable 2? Oh. Well, I'll use name, and maybe rather than date of birth, because date of birth implies the entire birth date. Yeah, maybe I'll use year. And what types of data will each of those variables be? So string for name and an integer. So my name will come from my name text box. A year will come from my Why is Visual Studio not happy here? What's it telling us? What's the problem? Right, so by default it's a string. My variable's an integer. So I can use int parse or convert to integer 32. So take my text variable. Now I have 2 values. One's a text value, one's a numeric value. Right? And it's an integer, there's no decimals. So now I want to write my own function here, which I'll call it calculate age. What information? I need one piece of information in this function. What is the input parameter value needed to calculate the age? What type of data do we need coming in? Yeah, it needs to be our function's going to take a year in. What's it going to send back? It's going to send, Ernest, why is it going to send an integer back? Right. We're going to take in a year and we're going to send back.
Could you send back a string and convert it before you send it back?
We could. Yeah, that would be okay as well.
That's what I kind of do.
So take a numeric year as an input parameter, send back a numeric age as a return value. We have a number coming in and a different number going out. So I'll just create numeric variable called age. How do we get the age?
Why did date time dot now dot here?
Okay, so that would be good. That way the year would be dynamic. That's great, Ryan. If we want to keep it simple, how would we do it? If we know what the current year is, 2016 minus year. So whatever year value comes from our form, we subtract that value from 2016 and we get a result, age. I mean, it's not exact because we're ignoring the months and the days. We're just dealing with the years only. So now how do we send back? Notice it's saying right now my function is red, saying the function is supposed to send back an integer, but right now there's no code. It's not returning anything. So now we will send back the age value we just calculated. So we just, now that red line goes away. Again, if I take this line out and save, my function turns red because it's supposed to send a number back, but there's no code that sends any value back. So we've gotten the two values. How do we execute this function now? What would we need here? We've set up this method, but now we need to call it or execute it so that our code goes from here down here. Right? This is what I was sketching out on the board. So how do we do this part? How does one method call another one?
Method out, like you go label whatever equals.
Okay. Yeah, well, we'll do the display after. Why don't I create another variable called age? And now we just call the name of our function. What value do we pass in here? What value does our calculate age function need? We're going to take the year the user typed in the box, and we're going to send it to our calculate method. And we're going to get back an integer result. I say the message should say, you are so this is almost correct.
Age is an integer, string, and also what's dot text at the end of message.
Right. Good catches. So I'm going to set the text property of my label. I want to print out this message. And I should convert this back to a string. So let's run it, and then we can go through one line at a time as it executes. So let's see what happens here. If I put in
94.
So if I use my little breakpoint, my debugger, we can watch what's happening one line at a time. So I put in the name Rich. My variable name is now Rich. My year starts at 0. when I put in 1956. So now our code is going to jump down here. We're going to pass in 1956 and call our method. So notice the code goes down here. So my age initializes to 0. After I run my subtraction, my age is now 60. And now my function is going to send back 60. And now I can just print my message. Rich, you are 60 years old. So this is how we would write our own method that has an input value and a return value and execute it. Kind of, if I'm repeating myself, that's good. Maybe this message will sink in. If this is really challenging or you're really confused by this, then it's time for a new approach in the course. Okay? Because everything we do moving forward is going to kind of use this structure where we're writing our own functions frequently that have input parameters and return values. And one method will call another method. Tisha, question?
Is it a problem if we don't convert the age to string?
Good question. Because when I did notice that, I was actually surprised. When I didn't have the toString, Visual Studio didn't actually complain.
Yeah.
Let's try it. Very good point. Okay, it actually does work even without converting it. I'm just going to try something. I wonder if, and I'm not entirely sure why, it may be that it in Visual Studio understands to treat it as a string because we have text in front of it and text after it. I'm just going to comment this out for a minute. Let's play around a few different ways and see. If we just do this, now it doesn't like it, right? I can't run the program now. It says, nope, won't run. So I'm glad you raised that issue, Letitia. So here Visual Studio's kind of has a bit of artificial intelligence. It's assuming that this value can be converted to a string automatically. So it's correct this way, but a little bit dangerous, right? Because the version below won't work. So to be safe, if ever we want a number and we're displaying it in as a text property, it's recommended that we explicitly convert it to a string. Because if we let Visual Studio just kind of assume what we want to do, it may do something different from what we want. But thank you for pointing that out. That's a very good question. So we are kind of safest. And there are a few different ways to write this. We could also create our variable here as a string and just convert it right up there. Take the function and get the age back. We could convert it to a string up there as well.
Well, what I did was I returned a string because I converted it to a string down in the method.
Okay, so your method returned a string instead of an int 32, and here you had return age.toString.
Yeah.
Yep, that would work too. And all of those versions are exactly the same in terms of functionality. Somewhere we should be converting that number to a string. We could do it in this line. We could do it in the next line. We could do it here, or we could do it inside our function and send back a string, not a number. Any of those would work. Are there any other questions about, it's not a lot of code. We really only wrote about, at the end of the day, if you leave out the white space, about 10 lines. But at this point, I'm trying to mentally beat you over the head with the idea of what a method is and what the structure of a method is. That every method has a name, input values the method needs, and a return type. Now we see here, and we've talked about it before, so the method we wrote returns int32. The click method automatically that Visual Studio wrote when I double clicked my button, it returned void.
That means nothing.
Okay, why does it? So can you explain in plain English? What does that mean? It returns nothing.
Because you're not actually using anything from the click method anywhere else in the code.
Right.
It's only within that method that the information's used, so the information doesn't have to leave that
Right.
method.
So our function, it still does some processing, but it doesn't send back any kind of value. There's nothing coming out of the value. So here would be an example of another kind of function we might write. You don't have to copy this, but we might write, let's say we write a function called something like, so this function will just send an email message out, but it doesn't return any data. It just executes something. And maybe we'd have as a parameter an email address. So send an email address in. This method will generate an email on our server, but it will be void. There's no data that comes back that we're going to use. In this function, we're calculating something, and this function returns or sends back a value we want to use in our program. Okay, I'm going to leave this up, and we're going to do one more example. Okay. Now we looked at this. So a couple weeks ago, when we looked at if statements, we had this flow chart. Where are we? Class 5. So here's our flow chart. We ask the user to put in a temperature value in degrees Celsius. And then we have a decision. If our temperature is above 0, we're going to display a message that says, let's go golfing. If the temperature is not above 0, we want our program to display a message that says, let's go skiing. Okay, so we have a decision. So you can even put it right on the same screen. You can either make another form in your application, or you can just make this form bigger, and you can add a separate section down below. So I want a temperature input, and then a button. When the user clicks the button, you need to evaluate the temperature and display either let's go golfing or let's go skiing. But that decision should be in its own method. Rather than writing all the code on the button, I want you to write a method that will take the temperature as an input and send back either the name of the message or at least the name of the activity and display it. So here are your instructions. So your method will take a number in, it will send a string back as a message, and then you'll display that message in a label. So either create another form on your page or just put this same code on your form 1. Either is okay. So I'll write the instructions on the board and I'll leave the code from the first part up so you can use this as a model. When it's not a test, you're allowed to ask for help. Here's your method header. Problem is the semicolon. Take the semicolon out. There you go. Now you may just have one extra bracket, which is fine. You just said semicolon. After method header. That's sketched out. That's what it should look like. That's the pseudocode. If you need to look at the structure of an if statement, it's on Blackboard from our slides in week 5. Pardon? Well, you'll need an if statement because there's two possibilities.
Yeah, okay, so it is.
You'll need an if else statement.
Okay.
So if the first condition is true, print the first message. Otherwise, print the other message.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have another question you wanted to look at before we fix it?
I think I had it.
Okay.
I'm gonna try
That's
to
good.
get
Good for you.
Slide to be fine.
Yep. Yep. We're gonna do a new test. Okay. So now you'll need a function that does this, a method that does this, right? And it will take in this value, just like we did with age. That's the red in here. Look at this in text. So this is good. The condition is we have to just send back the string. Okay. just like we did with the age, we sent back the age, and then we did the display. Here or away? Yeah, so what I want you to do is put this logic in a separate function, just like here we use a separate function for the age. Okay. I want you to just determine what the message should be based on the temperature, and the function just sends back a message. Okay. Yeah, so you'll have your button click, and then you'll have your function that does it, that sends back one of two values. Yeah. No, but that's the right, no, but you need the rest of the structure.
Yeah, no, but I just.
No, you don't need that. That's for a true, that's just a true false variable. Okay. So this is good. We are going to take in temperature, but instead of sending back another number, we're going to send back one of those two messages. So it's got to send back, it's got to, the return value is going to be a string. Instead of putting the message on a label here, we just want to return that message. So here we can just set output equal to, instead of the label, we need output equals that. Return the output. So don't take out the whole thing. Just take out LBL out.text and change that to output. Take out the dot text. Right. And then we'll do the same. Very good. Exactly right. And then on your button click, after you call the function, you can display the output in the label. are what type of data this function is gonna return. Right, so we want to change that. Right, okay. Now, the only other thing is say string text. You're creating variables twice. So let's just string text up here for your if statement. So we can create the variable there. So now it's created, and just take out the word string. So we're creating a variable, and depending on our condition, we're assigning it a variable, and we're sending it back. So now you just need to execute that function and pass in that value. And then you can display the result in there. You're on the right track.
I got that working. Yeah, because it's got names. Name is just. One separate method for calculating the if statement, just like we have here. So we want a method that takes in the temperature and returns a message. That won't be an integer, what will it be? What type of data, not an integer. We want to return one of these two messages. What type of data is this? Right. So our function will have a name, and the temperature is in, and it will return a string. Want you to create it so that
Yeah.
the message is in a separate bracket from the button click. So essentially, which is now should variable, which is. Or
So somehow your keyboard,
there's only one variable having to do though.
your computer? Yeah.
Equals. Equals. Equals your text box. Convert it into an integer. Either convert to. Choose. We have to start comparing between.
I'm not sure you're gonna have
That's
to,
what happens.
you're gonna have to look online. So check your model for this, for
you're at, you're gonna have to search. Okay, so you're on the right track. So all we want to do here is let's create a string variable. Well, first of all, yes, your method needs to return a string, and then inside the first line of your method. So before your if statement, create a string variable. Message.
And also, write dot text after that too.
End the line, end the command. So now you want to set message equal to this or this. Make sense? And then you will return that value, which
We
is
want to do something that calls on the go, some of the established that connector is a double.
okay. Okay. So on the assignment, yeah, you will only have one branch. It's only doing, it only has to have one input value at a time. So you can remove all the other parameters.
Yes.
So you only need just any, yeah, you could just call it, I just call it grade. Which was a double. I took it all the other ones. And then, yeah, I have this if statement, and at the bottom. I'll put mine up for a second, and you can see it.
Now you just call.
Sarah, so see, it took one parameter. So I created a variable at the top. I gave it a default value of F. And then if any of these conditions are true, I've changed the value of the letter grade and it returns it. So the function exists once, and then I executed the function 7 times. And each time I passed in the individual grade, and then including the average down at the bottom. Does that make sense? So you're on the right track with what you're doing. You only need one parameter.
Okay. So this works, and your code is totally fine. There's no errors. I want you to practice creating your own method like we did here. So instead of just having the if statement inside of the click method, I want you to write your own method that will accept the temperature as an input. So the temperature comes in. So I want you to create your own method. 2 parts to your method. The parameter. So what comes in, right? That's the temperature. Temperature comes in. And a message comes out. So temperature in and message out. Like we did here, right? Year came in, age comes out. So I want you to follow the same structure, but with this. Okay. So the temperature comes in and a message goes out. Does that make sense? Okay, so so your code is fine, but I want you to try it with using this structure. Question, right? You haven't given the variable a name. You've set it to string, but it needs a name.
Oh, that would go here.
So just like you did here, right? You have a data type and then the name of a variable. Here you have the data type, but you haven't put in the name of a variable.
Oh,
You have to create a variable by giving it a name. Okay, so this logic, we want to move in here. You can even drag and drop it. Drag it down. So the only other thing we want to do is instead of doing the display part here, we just want to put the message in a variable and return that variable. So we're getting a temperature in, we're figuring out what the message should be, and we send back the message, which isn't going to be an int, it will be what data type, right? So from here, we'll execute the method and then do the display up here. So we're kind of separating out the logic part, the part we're calculating, from the presentation into kind of two methods that talk to each other. Any luck with your keyboard? Okay, let's go to Google for a minute. So search for Lenovo IdeaPad space. Yeah, put in IdeaPads and space keyboard equals alternate keyboard. Let's try that. Let's let's look here. Okay, so let's check this. Yeah, talk language, region, language. Let's make sure it's set to the United States. Okay. So now you just need to display that variable, right? Because result holds the result of your function. So you just need to display your result variable. Yeah, try it out.
Okay, now, you just have to read that
Okay. Very close. You haven't passed, it doesn't know what temp is. You haven't defined, right? On lines here, on the board, on lines 23 and 24, we're getting the inputs from the form and storing them in variables. That's the one step you've missed. Everything else you've done is right, but it doesn't know that that's supposed to be the input. So you have to connect that variable to your text box. Okay, so you're just missing the simplest step, so easy fix.
I have one on that. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to just review this one together. So I built my form as walking around, everyone did. So I put on box and another button. So when the user clicks the button, what's the first thing we want to do? Read. Yeah, so let's get the temperature input and store in a variable. What data type will temperature be? Yeah, we'll use an integer. It's going to be a number. I'm going to take whatever the user typed in the temperature text box. I'm going to store it in a variable. Why is Visual Studio not happy? Right, I've got to convert it because my temperature is going to be in numeric. I'm going to take the text that was typed in the box and convert it to a number, exactly the same way we did above with our year. We took the year value, we converted it to a number, and we stored it in a variable. My next step will be execute a method that decides on the right activity. So now I need to create this method. So Raj, what does the method look like for the header part?
It's private.
Yep.
And then return type, there would be string.
Right. Why was it going to return a string?
We are using apples and we need to, like the input would be integer, we took the variable as integer, but we are giving output as string.
Okay, so that's right. Our method is going to send back a message in text. It's either going to send back let's go golfing or it's send back let's go skiing. Those are text. So what would be a good descriptive name for our method?
Get message.
Okay, we could call it get message, or anybody else, what'd you use for the name of your method? Okay, we could call it, I'll be more descriptive. I'm going to decide my activity. Maybe I'll call it. And does my method need any information coming in? Right, it needs the temperature, which is what type of data?
I usually use double, but I use 8.
Okay, yeah, so there's my method header. It has a descriptive name, so if someone else was looking at my code, they would have an idea of what that method does. Right? It's got an input, one parameter, one piece of data that comes in, that's numeric, and it will send back the string. So accept a numeric input parameter, send back a message as a string. Right? This is what our method is doing. I'm going to create a variable to hold the output message. I'll just create a string variable, and maybe I'll call it message. I'm not giving it a value. There's no message yet, right? We're going to have to figure out what message to display. We're just creating a variable. Now, when I first create this function, Visual Studio will underline it in red. And again, we talked about this message before. It says, not all code paths return a value. It's a very unhelpful message. What does that mean in plain language?
That doesn't mean it's value in all the outcomes yet, so that if they execute that command, it's not always going to come back.
That's right. So we've said our method needs to return a string. Right now, we haven't written any code to return any value. So now we need to check the temperature and decide the proper activity. So this is where we use our if statement. So if, and our condition will go there, else do something else. So what should our condition be?
If it's over 0.
Hey Juan, what'd you have in yours? What should I put in here? Thank you. So we're going to check the temperature coming in, and we're going to compare it and see if it's above 0. If the temperature is 0, our message becomes if it's warm out, we're above 0, that's going to be our message. Otherwise, our temperature is 0 or below, we're going to send a different message. Now we still have this error saying our function still isn't returning anything. So Cassidy, I'm going to ask you, what do we need at the bottom after we decide what our message should be? Right, and then we're going to return or send back one of those two messages. And notice my red line goes away now. So we will send back message. All right, we got a number in. We made a decision as to what we want to do with that number, and then we sent back one of two possible string values. Now I can run my code like this, but we won't see anything yet. Right? I can execute it. I say the temperature is 25, but nothing's happening. So there's one more step. What's the other thing we need to do on here?
We have to say the labels equal to message.
Yeah, well, actually, first we need to call. We've written our method, but we're never actually executing it. So I'll create a string message here as well. So we're going to execute our decide method. We send the temperature in, we get a message back, and we store that message in a variable. And now I just print that message into a label. We could do this all in one line. I could just say lblactivity.text equals, but I've broken it up to try and make it a little more clear step by step, all the things that we're doing. So now if I run the code, I pick a high temperature, anything greater than 0, it says go golfing. As soon as I go to 0 or below, my message says let's go skiing. So we talked right in the first week of class that all programming was really about getting inputs from our user, doing some kind of processing, and then generating outputs. That's really all we're doing here. We use our method to do our processing. And lastly, we display some kind of output back in our program. What this might look like in a real application. I mean, we talked about this a few weeks ago. How does this actually work? Well, I go to the newspaper. Right, I'm looking at any website. And by me clicking on this article, I'm providing an input to the website, right? I'm choosing a particular article. So when I click the article, the processing that's happening is the Globe and Mail server needs to go into their database, find the article I clicked on, and display that information. It's actually doing some other processing here. What's the other piece of processing besides giving me the article? I can see the article in the background. It's doing another piece of processing here too. Why can't I see the article? Okay. So it's asking me to sign up. Will it always ask every person who clicks to sign up?
No, because if someone's already logged in.
So if I'm already logged in, or what would be read the message? So they're checking, right? They're making a decision. Is this person logged in, yes or no? They're saying I'm not logged in. There's also another decision, right? It's possible to read articles if you're not logged in, but only 5 a month. And I've already read 5. If I go to a new browser, I'm going to go back to the same article. We're going to see something different. I'm going to click the exact same link. Notice I'm doing private browsing here. Am I logged in? No. So why is it showing me the article? I haven't signed up. I haven't logged in.
Because it doesn't recognize that it was you, but if you're not incognito mode, so it's not tracing back, but you've read 5 articles.
Right. This is my regular browser that I visit Globe and Mail in all the time. So even though I haven't logged in, they've tracked that this month I've looked at 5 articles already. So it's now not going to let me in unless I've logged in. By going into an untracked browser, they don't know who I am, so it will let me click on 5 articles. I can probably go click on any 5 articles, 2, 3, and then it's going to block me at the 6. So each time it's making a decision, right? Are you logged in? And if you're not logged in, how many articles have you clicked this month? I probably can do a couple more, and then it's going to stop me. There we go. As soon as I hit my, so each time there's that decision. How many are, is this person logged in, yes or no? If they are, show them. If they're not, check how many articles we've tracked that they've looked up. So what we're doing here, I realize we're not building a web page, but the idea is the same things we're doing here, that's what's happening on every website we go to every day. That's how we know things like, is the person logged in, yes or no? If they are logged in, are they allowed to see this item or change it, yes or no? We're using these if statements to make decisions as to how our applications are supposed to behave. Right? So there is a reason why we're going over this, because when we actually build web applications, we need to understand this structure so they can work the way that our clients need them to work. So for those of you who maybe have a little programming knowledge already, I apologize if this is being a little bit repetitive, but it's a fundamentals course. Most of you in this room have never done this before. So as I said in week 1, the only way you're going to get good at it is to do it repeatedly. And if you're not feeling comfortable, especially, you need to be practicing outside of class. Okay, if you go and get a copy of the textbook, it'll give you all kinds of little sample applications like this that you can try to code in C#. Not going to get much easier. Okay, you have to practice like practicing anything else. Does anybody have any questions about any of the code that's here? If there's anything that you're not clear on, doesn't make sense, we could talk about it. Another suggestion for practice, here's what I would suggest. Again, to practice, I'm not requiring it or assigning it, but if on your assignment, well, first of all, if you really struggle with the assignment, I suggest you might want to try doing assignment 1 again. You got the assignment working, but you repeated your code 7 times, and Sarah, kudos to you because you're trying to rewrite it, right, using a method. Try to rewrite your code in assignment 1 so that you have one method, kind of like this, rather than repeating this big block of if statements 7 times. You could try to make your code more efficient by using a method that takes in the grade and returns the letter grade. Way to practice so that you start to become more comfortable writing your own methods. There is one other thing I want to look at quickly. We're not going to get into loops. We'll leave that for next week. Now, this code that I wrote here with this long if statement, right? We've got 5 different conditions. You know, it's above 79, above 69. So this is one way of writing this code, and it's correct. But we have another way that's actually a little bit shorter. When we have more than 2 conditions, we can use a different structure as opposed to if, else, if, else, if, else, if. Does anybody know what that structure is called that allows us to check multiple possibilities for a condition? Yeah, a case or a switch statement. So I've put the structure up here, and we can try a simple example. We'll actually try coding this example. So let's say, almost like on a game show, right? An old thing on a game show is the contestant gets to pick what's behind door number 1, door number 2, or door number 3, right? And they get whatever prize is behind that door. So we could write it as an if statement. If door equals 1, do this. Else if door equals 2, do this. Else door equals 3. Or if they didn't choose, we have an else statement. But we could also use the structure this way with a switch and case statement. It actually allows us to write a little bit less code. So the logic is identical. Logic is the same, but we actually are writing a bit less code this way. So let's quickly, we'll just do this one together and then we'll stop for today. I want to try this case example, and then I'm going to give you one to try at home. Not for marks, but I want you to do it as homework, and we'll review at the start of class after reading week. Okay. So in my solution, we'll do it right in this form. Okay. So let's make one other set with, I'll just put it over here. I'll drag a couple labels on. So put a label on over here that says, choose a door. I'll put a text box on beside it. And I'll call it TXT door. I'll put on a button. That I'll call BTN get prize. My button will say get prize. So a label, a text box, and a button. Everyone knows how to do this part. And then I'll put on a label underneath over here. And I'll call this one maybe LBL prize. The user will type in a number in the text box, they'll click the button, and we're going to use this switch statement to determine if they entered 1, 2, 3, or something else. So just on your form, add 2 more labels, a text box, and another button. Once you have those things, double click your button and Visual Studio will write a click method for you. So here we will get the door number chosen by the user. So I'll create a variable. What type of data will the user be entering? Number, text, date. Yeah, it'll be a number, so we'll use an integer. And I'll just call my variable door. Whatever they've typed in the door text box, we want to store in a variable.
Could we use a drop down instead of a text box? Because if we're going to give them a finite.
We could, but yes, that's a good idea. For today, for now, we'll just use a text box. But yes, you're right, Max. Putting in a drop down would limit their choices. And we'll want to convert that to an integer. Now we'll create our own method, but instead of using an if statement to make a decision, we're going to use a switch statement. So we'll create our own method that will return a string. So just like in our last method, it'll basically be a message. We'll call this determine prize. And we need one value coming in. What value will our method need to determine the prize? Yeah, which door they picked. So it will also be an integer. So again, I'll create a variable called message. We won't give it a value yet. We'll just set up that variable. And now we want to determine the prize based on the door number entered. So we have 4 possibilities that we're going to account for. Door number 1, door number 2, door number 3, or anything else. If they picked anything else, we want to display a message telling them they didn't get a prize. So here's our structure of how it's going to look. We use the switch statement. We'll put it in curly brackets. So if the user enters door number 1, what should the prize be?
Can't stand.
Okay, actually, you know what? We'll, okay, so. And break meaning don't evaluate, if this condition is true, don't evaluate any of the other conditions. Okay, somebody else? What about what's behind door number 2? What would you like behind door number 2? What should our second prize be? Daniel, you have an idea? All right, yeah. And again, after that, we put in a break statement, stop. They picked what's behind door number 3. Somebody else? Would be a good prize, would get you to enter the contest. Okay. And then our default is like an else. It's the equivalent of an else. So if none of those conditions are true, oops. We have 4 possibilities. The user could enter 1, 2, or 3 and win a prize, or if they've entered anything else. So now we need to send back the message. We'll just use the return command, return our message. So we could write this code with if door equals 1, do this. Else if door equals 2, do this. Else if door equals 3, do this. Else. They would be equivalent. This is actually a little bit less code to write. And we don't have to deal with as many brackets, which reduces the chance of error. So now we just want to execute this function. There's no such thing as a golf fish. So up above, we now need to call determine prize, pass in our door variable, and display a message in our label. Determine prize. So I'll just do it this way. LBL prize dot text equals take the door that was entered, execute our method that returns a message, and print that message out to our label. I'm just going to try out the code. I'll put it back in a minute. I know some of you are still typing. I just want to make sure it's accurate. Should be. So if I put in door number 1, I get spam. Door number 2, I get goldfish. 3, I get kittens. Anything else, I get nothing. So this is just equivalent of an if with multiple conditions, where we're checking the same value, same variable for multiple possibilities of values. We don't have to use this, but we are going to see this.
Use the drop down, will we be able to get rid of the default?
Yes. So if we gave the user a drop-down list where they could only pick 1, 2, or 3, and they couldn't type in a value of their own, we wouldn't need this condition. because it would be impossible. The user, they would have to have selected something. But it's important we look at this because we're going to see this when we're programming this structure. We never have to use it. We could just use if statements if you prefer. So I'm going to put it on Blackboard. Actually, I'll put it up on Blackboard now. Not for marks, but it is homework. But here's what I want you to do. Similar to what we just did. Okay. And you can do it right on the same form, build another form. So on a form, add 2 labels, 1 text box, and a button. When the user enters a country in the text box, clicks the button, use a switch statement to display this. Capital city is, and then the name of the city. So here are the values. So you have to have these countries and cities. If the user types in Canada, it should say capital's Ottawa. I'll save this on Blackboard. You don't have to take notes. Any other countries in the class that should be represented here? I've tried to get everybody. Is there anybody from another country I haven't mentioned here? We're an inclusive kind of college. Don't want anybody to feel left out. Is that correct, Alex?
Yep.
Okay, anything else we should add to the list?
Russia.
Okay, so you got a big switch statement. Okay, and then if it's any other country, it should say, we don't know the capital city. Okay, so I will post my solution files up to Blackboard for today so you can use them as a guide. Okay, the video's on YouTube. So I want you to, at home, use a switch statement to build a little program that will take one of these countries and display what the capital city is. If it's not in the list, you just display unknown as the city. Okay, it's not for marks, but we'll review it at the start of class. Okay, so you have next week. If you feel kind of like it's a good chance for, especially those of you who have really been struggling, it's a good chance for you to catch up. Okay, so go down to Student Services and speak to about a peer tutor if you feel you need one. Go to the bookstore, get a textbook. Go over the stuff we've been doing in class with the YouTube lessons. But if you're really having a hard time, you're going to need to spend some extra work outside here trying to get caught up. Okay, that's it for this week. Nothing graded, no marks. Good luck on your other midterm tests, and I'll see you in a couple weeks. I also will be on campus next week, so if you want to come for some extra help next week, I'm around. It's a good chance for you to get some extra help if you're having a hard time.